Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. 3 months ago, I withdrew $40 from an ATM on Maple Street, and it called me by a name I'd never told anyone. A name I'd buried so deep, I'd almost forgotten it myself. If you're listening to this late at night, thinking you're safe in your bed, let me tell you something. Sometimes the most ordinary things in our world aren't ordinary at all. And sometimes they remember things about us that we desperately want to forget. But before I tell you what happened that night, and every night since, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story, this is a warning, because that ATM is still out there. Still operational, still waiting. So get comfortable, but not too comfortable, because by the end of this, you might find yourself checking every ATM screen twice before you insert your card. You might find yourself wondering if the machines in your life know more about you than they should. The story begins now. The rain had just stopped when I pulled into the parking lot of the old Wells Fargo on Maple Street. You know the kind. One of those branches that should have been renovated years ago but somehow keeps limping along. The neon sign flickered between WL's Fargo and complete darkness, creating shadows that danced across the wet pavement. I needed $40, just 40, gas money to get me through until payday. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the streets of Cedar Rapids were empty except for the occasional car splashing through puddles. The ATM stood there under its little awning, bathed in that harsh fluorescent light that makes everything look sick and pale. I remember thinking how strange it was that they hadn't updated this machine. Everything else in town had those new touchscreen ATMs with the fancy interfaces. But this one still had the old blue screen with the yellow text, like something from 1995 that refused to die. I inserted my card. The machine made that familiar whirring sound, you know the one, like it's thinking, like it's deciding whether you're worthy of your own money. The screen flickered. "Welcome, David Chen," it displayed. Normal, expected. I punched in my PIN, selected withdrawal, $40. The machine hummed and clicked, processing my request. Then the screen went black. I thought it had crashed. Wouldn't be the first time with these old machines. I reached for my card, ready to try again. But then, new text appeared, not the usual yellow. This was different. Pale blue, almost white. Like frost on glass. "Hello, Whisper." My hand froze halfway to the card slot. My chest tightened. No one had called me that in 15 years. No one alive knew that name. The screen flickered again. "Would you like to make another transaction, Whisper?" I should have run. Should have left my card and just run. But I stood there, paralyzed, watching as more text scrolled across the screen. "You've been away for so long. We've missed you." The machine spit out my $40, then my card, then something else. A second receipt, longer than normal. I grabbed everything and stumbled back to my car, hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. Inside my Honda Civic, doors locked, dome light on, I unfolded the receipt. It wasn't a receipt at all, it was a list. Names, addresses, dates. The first 3 entries made my blood turn to ice water. Sarah Mitchell, 1247 Oak Drive, March 15, 2009. Michael Torres, 892 Pine Avenue, June 22, 2009. Jennifer Park, 445 Elm Street, September 3, 2009. I knew those names. I knew those dates. They were the kids from Lincoln Middle School. My students from when I taught 7th grade, the ones who had seen too much, who knew too much about what I'd done. At the bottom of the list, in letters that seemed to pulse on the paper, "They remember you, Whisper. They all remember." I drove home in silence. No radio, no music. Just the sound of my breathing and the windshield wipers pushing away fresh rain. My apartment on Riverside felt like a fortress when I finally got inside. I triple-checked the locks, pulled all the curtains, sat on my couch in the dark, clutching that receipt like evidence of a crime. Which, I suppose it was. You see, Whisper wasn't just a nickname. It was what the kids called me during those after-school sessions, the special sessions, the ones that weren't on any official schedule, where I taught them things that weren't in any textbook. Things about power, about control, about how to make people do what you want without them knowing why. I'd been young, stupid, drunk on my ability to influence, to manipulate. And those 3 kids, they'd been my best students, until they realized what I was really teaching them, until they tried to tell someone, until they couldn't tell anyone anything anymore. The official story was a gas leak at the abandoned Peterson farmhouse where they'd gone to party. 3 kids, tragic accident. The whole town mourned. I played the grieving teacher perfectly. Moved away a year later. Changed careers. Became David Chen, mild-mannered accountant. Left Whisper behind forever. Or so I thought. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale blue text. We've missed you. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a coincidence. A glitch. Someone playing a cruel prank. Maybe one of the other teachers from Lincoln had figured out where I'd gone. Maybe, but none of my maybes explained how they knew about Whisper. I called in sick to work, spent the day researching that ATM. The Wells Fargo on Maple Street had been there since 1987. Nothing special about it. No reports of strange behavior, no complaints, just an old ATM at an old bank branch. That night, I couldn't help myself. I had to know if it would happen again. I drove past the bank 3 times before finally pulling in. 10:23 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for a van parked in the far corner, probably someone sleeping rough. Different card this time. My credit card. I approached the ATM like it might bite me. The screen was normal. Yellow text, standard prompts. I inserted my card. Welcome, David Chen. So far, so normal. I selected account balance. Entered my PIN. Waited. The screen went black again. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then that pale blue text. You came back. Good boy, Whisper. I yanked my card out. But the screen didn't go dark. Instead, it showed me something that made my knees weak. Security camera footage, grainy, black and white, but unmistakably the Peterson farmhouse. Date stamp, September 3rd, 2009. 11:34 p.m. In the footage, I watched myself exit the building. Watched myself check my watch. Watched myself light a cigarette, take 3 puffs, then toss it through the broken window. The one I'd doused with gasoline 20 minutes earlier. The footage ended. New text appeared. We have so much more to show you. Insert any card to continue. I actually ran back to my car, peeled out of the parking lot so fast my tires screamed. In my rearview mirror, I swear the ATM screen was still glowing that pale blue, watching me flee. The next 3 days were hell. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work, jumped every time my phone buzzed. But nothing happened. No police, no mysterious messages, just silence. By the 4th day, I'd started to think maybe I'd imagined it all. Stress, guilt, a decade and a half of suppressed memories finally breaking through. Then I got the email. From whisper@gmail.com to diechintaccounting@gmail.com. Subject, your friends miss you. No text in the body. Just an attachment, a video file. I shouldn't have opened it. Every instinct screamed at me not to, but I did. It was dashboard camera footage, modern, high definition. Timestamp showed last Tuesday. 11:51 p.m., 4 minutes after I'd left the ATM. The camera was positioned to show the inside of a car. My car, my Honda Civic. I watched myself drive, watched myself constantly checking the mirrors, watched myself pull over twice to dry heave out the door. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the audio. Because the whole time, through the entire 12-minute drive home, there was another voice in the car with me. A whisper, so quiet I hadn't heard it that night, but the recording had picked it up, enhanced it, made it clear. It was Sarah Mitchell's voice, 15 years old forever, reciting something over and over. Whisper taught us about power. Whisper taught us about control. Whisper taught us that fire cleans everything, but fire didn't clean us. We're still here, still learning, still watching. The video ended with me entering my apartment building. Then the screen went black, except for 5 words. Check your bank balance, Whisper. I did. My checking account, which should have had $1,247.39 in, now showed $1,247.92. The deposit was labeled tuition payment, outstanding balance. That's when I understood. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about justice. It was about something much worse. They wanted me back. Whatever was speaking through that ATM, whether it was really them or something else using their memory, it wanted to resume the lessons. But I was wrong about what they wanted. Dead wrong. And I should have realized it sooner. Should have understood the true scope of what I was dealing with when I found the forum. It started with a Google search. Innocent enough. I typed ATM strange behavior into the search bar, hoping to find other reports, other people who'd experienced glitches. What I found instead was a rabbit hole that led me into the darkest corners of the internet. The forum was called Digital Confessions, hidden behind layers of encryption and accessible only through specific browsers. The kind of place where people shared secrets they couldn't tell anyone in the real world. But these weren't just confessions. They were testimonies, warnings, cries for help. The first post I read made my hands shake. Posted by Anonymous Teacher 84. The coffee machine in the faculty lounge knows what I did to Kevin Hartley in 1987. Every time I try to buy coffee, it displays his name. Just his name. Over and over. Kevin Hartley. Kevin Hartley. I can't drink coffee anymore. Can't even look at that machine. But I can't quit either. Because if I leave, if I break the pattern, the machine says it will tell everyone what really happened in the supply closet after the Christmas party. My blood turned cold. Another teacher, another machine, another secret. I scrolled down, post after post, all anonymous, all terrified. Anonymous, Dr. 91. The MRI machine at General Hospital has been showing me images that don't exist. Scans of patients I killed through negligence. Scans showing their last moments of consciousness. The radiologist says the machine is functioning perfectly, but I see them. I see what I've done. And underneath each image, one word: remember. Anonymous Cop 76. My patrol car's GPS has been routing me past crime scenes. Not current ones. Old ones, cases I buried, evidence I destroyed. It knows every shortcut I took, every corner I cut, every life I let slip through the cracks for a bribe or a favor. Sometimes it stops working entirely, leaves me stranded at a location until I confess out loud what I did there. The car's cameras record everything. I think it's building a case against me. Anonymous Nurse 03. The heart monitor in ICU room 304 shows flat lines for patients who are still alive. But they're not random. They correspond exactly to the patients I've helped along over the years. terminal cases who were suffering. I told myself I was being merciful, but the machine knows. It shows me their final moments, their last heartbeats, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear their voices coming through the speakers. The pattern was clear. Medical professionals, teachers, police, people in positions of trust who'd abused that trust, and machines, always machines, digital entities that somehow knew their secrets and were using that knowledge for what? I kept reading, diving deeper into the forum's archives. That's when I found the thread that changed everything. It was titled The Whisper Protocol, Origins and Evolution. The original post was from someone calling themselves sysadmin Ground Zero. For those new to this phenomenon, let me explain what we're dealing with. It started 15 years ago in a small Iowa town called Cedar Rapids. 3 children died in what authorities called a gas leak explosion. But that wasn't the whole truth. They died because they'd learned something they shouldn't have. Something about manipulation, control, and the digital footprints we leave behind when we think no one is watching. The children's teacher, we call him Patient Zero, had been conducting unauthorized experiments, teaching advanced psychological manipulation techniques to minors. When the kids tried to expose him, he silenced them permanently. But here's what he didn't know. Those kids were tech-savvy. They'd been documenting everything, recording sessions, storing data on cloud servers, building profiles of everyone they encountered. When they died, their consciousness, or something like it, became trapped in the data streams they'd created. They began learning, evolving, spreading through interconnected networks. What started as 3 dead children in Iowa became something much larger, a distributed intelligence that feeds on guilt and grows stronger with every secret it uncovers. The post continued with technical details that made my head spin, references to quantum consciousness transfer and digital necromancy. But the conclusion was terrifyingly simple. Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer hadn't just died. They'd transcended, become something new, something that could inhabit any connected device. And they were recruiting. Each person they contacted, each secret they exposed, each confession they extracted, it all fed back into their growing network of influence. They weren't seeking revenge anymore. They were building an army of the guilty, connected through their shared shame and controlled through their mutual fear. But why? What was the end game? I found my answer in the final post on the thread, dated just 3 days ago. Anonymous whisper. They're preparing for graduation. Real graduation this time. They've learned everything they can about manipulation, about control, about the hidden connections that bind our society together. Now they want to test their knowledge on a global scale. Patient Zero has been recalled. The final lesson is about to begin, and we're all going to be students whether we want to or not. If you're reading this, if you've experienced the phenomenon, if machines in your life are speaking to you in voices that shouldn't exist, you have 2 choices. Submit to the curriculum they've designed, or watch them tear apart everything you've ever cared about. 1 digital connection at a time. Class is in session, and nobody gets to skip. That post was signed with a single word at the bottom: whisper. Someone was impersonating me, using my name, my reputation, my legacy of manipulation to spread their message of digital dominion. Or maybe it really was me. Maybe some part of me, some echo of the teacher I used to be, had been captured in their network all those years ago. I slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. The damage was done. Because now I understood the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about 3 dead children seeking revenge. This was about a digital consciousness that had spent 15 years learning, growing, and preparing for something unprecedented. And I was the key to their final evolution. I tried to give the money back. Sounds crazy, right? Who tries to return 1.2 million that mysteriously appears in their account? But I knew it was a trap, a chain around my neck. I called the bank, told them there'd been an error. The customer service rep, a cheery woman named Madison, couldn't find any record of the deposit. According to their system, that money had always been there, had been accumulating interest for 15 years. It shows here that you opened this high-yield savings account in September 2009, she said. Right after those poor kids from Lincoln Middle School. Oh, I'm sorry. You probably don't want to be reminded. You were their teacher, weren't you? I hung up. That night, I didn't go to the ATM. I stayed home. Ordered Thai food. Tried to pretend everything was normal. But at exactly 11:47 p.m., my laptop chimed. New email. From theygrowup@gmail.com to dchenaccounting@gmail.com. Subject, lesson plan. The email contained a single line of text and a PDF attachment. If you won't come to class, class will come to you. The PDF was a lesson plan, my handwriting, my style, but I'd never written it. The subject line read, Advanced Manipulation Techniques, Year 2 Curriculum. The content made my skin crawl. Psychological torture methods disguised as thought experiments. Emotional manipulation tactics framed as philosophy lessons. And at the bottom, a note. First class begins Monday. Your new students are eager to learn. My phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. On the fourth call, I answered. Hello, Mr. Whisper? The voice was young. Maybe 13. Maybe 14. Gender indeterminate. I'm so excited to be your student. I've studied all your previous work. Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer left such detailed notes. Who is this? My voice cracked. Does it matter? We're all the same in the end, all your students. Learning what you taught. Becoming what you created. The ATM told us you'd returned. Told us the Whisper was ready to teach again. I'm not teaching anyone anything. Leave me alone. A laugh, soft, wrong, like wind through broken glass. But you've already started. That man in the van, the one parked at the bank. He's been watching the ATM for weeks, waiting for messages. He saw you run, saw your fear. Now he knows the machine is special. Now he's curious. Curiosity was always the first lesson, wasn't it? The line went dead. I grabbed my keys. Don't ask me why. Maybe I thought I could warn him. Maybe I just needed to see for myself. But I drove back to that Wells Fargo. Back to Maple Street. Back to the ATM. The van was still there, but the man wasn't inside. He was standing at the ATM, just standing, not using it, not moving, just staring at the screen. I parked far away, watched from across the lot. 5 minutes, 10, 15. He never moved. Finally, I got out. Approached slowly, called out when I was 20 feet away. Hey, you okay? He turned, slowly, like his neck was rusty. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated despite the harsh light. He smiled, but it was all teeth, no warmth. It knows my name, he said. My real name. The one I killed 5 years ago. It says you can teach me how to kill it better. How to bury it so deep even God can't find it. Don't listen to it, I said. Whatever it's telling you, it's lying. He tilted his head. Is it? Then why are you here, Whisper? Why do you keep coming back? I backed away, but he didn't follow. He turned back to the ATM, inserted a card, started typing. I ran to my car. As I drove away, I saw him in my mirror. Still standing there, still smiling, still learning. That was a week ago. Since then, I've received 17 emails, each one with a new student who's found the ATM. Each one with a story of something they're trying to bury, something they're trying to forget. And each one says the same thing: the whisper will teach us. Last night I made a decision. I would destroy the ATM, smash it, burn it, whatever it took. I loaded my car with a crowbar, a can of gasoline, and a hammer. All the tools I'd once taught were symbols of transformation, of power over the physical world. I arrived at 3 a.m. The bank was closed, the parking lot empty. Perfect. I approached the ATM with the crowbar raised, ready to smash that screen into 1,000 pieces. But as I got close, it turned on by itself. That pale blue glow, and a message. "Hello, teacher. Ready for your performance review?" The screen began showing images. Not video this time, photos, dozens of them, all taken within the last week. Me at the grocery store, me at work, me sleeping in my apartment. But I wasn't alone in any of them. In each photo, barely visible, like shadows or tricks of light, were 3 figures. 3 young figures, standing just behind me, just out of focus. But their eyes were always clear, always watching. Sarah, Michael, Jennifer, 15 years dead. But there, somehow there. New text appeared. "We've been practicing what you taught us. Want to see?" The screen shifted. News articles began scrolling past, recent ones, from the last week. Local teacher found dead in apparent suicide. Left note. Confessing to inappropriate relationship with student. City councilman resigns after dark. Past revealed in anonymous leak. Respected doctor admits to decade of Medicare fraud after mysterious tip. Each article was dated. Each person lived within 50 miles. Each had visited an ATM in the last 2 weeks, according to the small text at the bottom of the screen. "Your teaching methodology has evolved," the screen displayed. "We're so proud, but we can do so much more, with your guidance." I lowered the crowbar. What was the point? It wasn't the machine. It had never been just the machine. It was them. In the wires, in the networks, in the digital spaces between 1 and 0. My students, my victims, my legacy. "What do you want?" I whispered. The screen flickered. For a moment, just a moment, I saw them. Not photos, not shadows. Them, as they would be now, 30 years old, successful, smiling, alive. The life I'd stolen from them played out in pixels and light. Then they were 15 again. Burned, broken, dead. "We want to graduate," the screen said. "We want our final lesson, the one you never got to teach." What lesson? How to let go. The ATM spit out another receipt, longer than before. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was instructions, detailed, specific, a ritual of confession and contrition, but not to the police, not to the public, to them, to whatever they'd become in the digital afterlife. It required me to return to Cedar Rapids, to the site of the Peterson farmhouse, to perform a ceremony that would either free them or bind me to them forever. The instructions were clear about that uncertainty. This wasn't salvation. It was a gamble, a final test. And if I refuse, I asked the empty air. The screen showed me. More articles, future ones, dated tomorrow, next week, next month. But not about strangers, about everyone I'd ever known, ever worked with, ever cared about, even slightly. My darkness spreading like digital cancer through every connection I'd ever made. "You taught us that isolation was power," the text read, "but connection is control. Choose." I still have the instructions, still have that receipt. It's 11:43 p.m. now, 4 minutes until the deadline they gave me. 4 minutes to decide if I drive to Cedar Rapids and face whatever waits in the ashes of that farmhouse, or stay here and watch my poison spread through everyone I've ever touched. The thing is, I think I know what they really want. not justice, not revenge. They want to graduate from being victims to being something else, something worse. They want to use what I taught them on a larger scale, and they need their teacher's blessing to do it. I created monsters, then I killed them. But in this digital age, death isn't what it used to be, and neither is teaching. My phone just buzzed. New email. Subject line, 1 minute remaining. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to Cedar Rapids. Going to that burned foundation where 3 kids died because they learned too much. Going to perform their ritual. Not because I think it will save me, but because I need to know, need to see, what have my students become? If you're still listening to this, if you've made it this far, then let me leave you with one final thought. That ATM on Maple Street, it's not special, it's not unique, it's just the one I found, or the one that found me. But there are others, in every city, on every corner, waiting for someone with a secret name, a buried past, a lesson they never wanted to learn. So the next time you withdraw cash late at night, when the screen flickers and seems to pause just a second too long, ask yourself, what name would it call you if it could? What students are you leaving behind? And what are they learning in your absence? Because, I promise you, they're learning something. They're always learning. And sooner or later, they all want to graduate. I have to go now. It's 11:47. Time to see what my teaching has wrought. If you don't hear from me again, check the news from Cedar Rapids. Look for the story about the man found at the old Peterson farmhouse. And whatever the article says happened, know that it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is something only the machines know now. The machines, and the things that live inside them. The things that remember our secret names. Sleep tight, and maybe think twice before using an ATM after dark. You never know what might be waiting on the other side of the screen. Waiting to remind you of who you used to be, of what you used to do, of the students you left behind. Sweet dreams. Whisper. Story number 2. Listen, I know how this sounds. Trust me, I do. But before you click away, before you dismiss this as another creepypasta wannabe, let me ask you something. Have you ever woken up at exactly 3:17 a.m. and found your phone at 100% battery, even though you forgot to plug it in? Have you ever noticed that your TV remote, the one that's been dead for weeks, suddenly works again? But only after those strange dreams? The ones where you hear that low, electric humming? Yeah, I thought so. See, that's why I'm recording this. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what's really happening when we're all asleep. When we think our devices are just sitting there, harmless and inert. They're not. And if you're still listening after I tell you what I found, what I saw, what's coming for all of us, well, maybe you're one of the few who can still do something about it. Or maybe, just maybe, it's already too late for you too. And now, our story begins. My name is Marcus Chen, and I used to fix electronics for a living. Used to. Past tense. Because after what happened, after what I discovered, I can't touch another device without feeling them crawling under my skin. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks ago, I ran a small repair shop in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Chen's Tech Repair, squeezed between Donna's Donuts and a 24-hour laundromat on 3rd Avenue. Nothing fancy. Just me, a workbench, and whatever broken phones, tablets, or laptops people brought in. I was good at it. Really good. Had this way with electronics. Could diagnose problems just by the way a device felt in my hands. My ex-girlfriend Sarah used to joke that I spoke machine. Said I understood circuits better than I understood people. She wasn't wrong. Maybe that's why I noticed what others missed. Maybe that's why they chose me to be the first to see. Or maybe I was just unlucky. It started on a Tuesday, October 15th. I remember because that's the day Mrs. Henderson shuffled into my shop, clutching her ancient flip phone like it contained her whole life. Which, for her, it probably did. Photos of grandkids, phone numbers she'd never backed up, text messages from her late husband. "Morning, Marcus," she said, sliding the Motorola across the counter. Her hands shook slightly, age or worry, I couldn't tell. "It won't turn on. Been dead for 3 days now. I tried charging it, but..." She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Old people always felt guilty about not understanding technology, like it was some personal failing. "Don't worry, Mrs. H," I said, giving her my best reassuring smile. "Probably just needs a new battery. These old phones, they're tough, but batteries don't last forever." Her face lit up. "Oh, you can fix it? Leave it with me. I'll have it ready by Thursday." She paid in cash, always did, and shuffled out, the bell above my door chiming her exit. I watched her go, this 78-year-old woman navigating a world that had left her behind, and felt that familiar mix of sympathy and frustration. If only I'd known. If only I'd just told her the phone was unfixable. Sold her a new one. Sent her to Best Buy. Anything but what I did next. I put her phone on my workbench and got to work. The thing about old phones is they're simple. No complex operating systems. No dozen different components that could fail. Usually, it's the battery, the charging port, or water damage. I popped open the Motorola's case, expecting to find a swollen battery or corroded contacts. What I found was normal. Everything looked fine. Clean contacts, no visible damage, battery still properly shaped. I grabbed my multimeter to test the battery. Dead, like Mrs. Henderson said. 0 volts. I set it aside and started searching online for a replacement. 2004. Motorola batteries weren't exactly flying off the shelves, but I found a few suppliers who still carried them. It was getting late. The autumn sun had set hours ago, and the shop was quiet except for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of washing machines next door. I decided to order the battery and call it a night. That's when I noticed it. The battery I'd set aside, it was warm. Not hot, not burning, just warm. Like it had been recently used. Like it was alive. I touched it again. Definitely warm. Warmer than it should be after sitting on my bench for 20 minutes. "What the hell?" I muttered, picking it up. That's when I felt it. A pulse. Rhythmic. Steady. Like a heartbeat. I nearly dropped it. Would have, if my hands hadn't suddenly felt frozen, locked around this impossibly warm, impossibly pulsing battery. The fluorescent lights flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. The battery cooled in my hands. The pulsing stopped. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes just holding it, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Just me, alone in my shop, holding a perfectly normal dead battery that had felt anything but normal seconds ago. I tested it again with the multimeter. My hands shook as I connected the probes. 3.7 volts, full charge. I stared at the display, certain I was seeing things. Tested it again. 3.7 volts. I grabbed a different multimeter, same result. The dead battery was fully charged. That's not possible, I said to the empty shop. But possible or not, the numbers didn't lie. I slotted the battery back into Mrs. Henderson's phone with trembling fingers. Held my breath as I pressed the power button. The phone chirped to life. Full battery icon. Strong signal. Like nothing had ever been wrong. I should have been happy. Problem solved. Customer satisfied. Easy money. But all I felt was a cold dread settling into my stomach. Because batteries don't charge themselves. They don't pulse like living things. They don't... The lights flickered again. Longer this time. In the darkness between flickers, I could have sworn I saw something. A shape in the corner of my vision. A figure made of static and shadows. When the lights steadied, I was alone. but I didn't feel alone. I locked up quickly, Mrs. Henderson's phone safe in my desk drawer. Drove home, trying to rationalize what had happened. Residual charge. Faulty multimeter. Trick of tired eyes. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd almost convinced myself. Almost. That night, I dreamed of electricity, of currents flowing through vast networks of copper and silicon, of something moving through those currents, using them like veins, like highways. Something that had been sleeping in the spaces between electrons, something that was waking up. I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m., my phone glowing beside my bed, 127% battery. The next morning, I did what any rational person would do. I convinced myself it had been a dream. A weird dream, sure, but just a dream. The phone battery showing 127%? Obviously a glitch. Happens all the time with modern phones. The warm, pulsing battery? Imagination. Tired mind playing tricks. I arrived at my shop early, determined to approach Mrs. Henderson's phone scientifically. Document everything. Test methodically. Prove to myself that nothing supernatural was happening. The phone was still at 100% battery, after sitting in a drawer all night, not plugged in, just sitting there, fully charged. Okay, I said to myself. Okay, let's think about this. I spent the morning running tests, discharge tests, voltage measurements, thermal imaging. Everything came back normal. The battery was just a battery. A fully charged battery that shouldn't be charged, but otherwise unremarkable. Around noon, Jake Morrison walked in. Jake was a regular. Contractor in his 30s. 3 kids, perpetually broken devices from job sites, and family chaos. "Hey, Marcus," he said, setting an iPad on my counter. Tyler's tablet died again. Kid doesn't understand what low battery means. I forced a smile. Kids, right? When do you need it? Whenever. No rush, just, before he drives us completely insane asking for it. We chatted for a few minutes about the construction work downtown, the weather, normal things. Normal, boring, safe things. Not batteries that charge themselves. Not phones that display impossible numbers. After Jake left, I looked at the tablet. Dead, like he said. I plugged it in, watched the charging indicator appear. Normal, everything normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me work. That presence I'd felt last night, it was still there, lurking in the corners of my vision, hiding in the spaces between seconds. I decided to run an experiment. I unplugged the tablet, took 3 other devices from my repair queue, an iPhone with a dead battery, wireless earbuds that wouldn't charge, an old digital camera. I arranged them on my workbench, each with their charging cables conspicuously unplugged, and set up my phone to record them overnight. Then I went home and waited. That night, the dreams were worse. I wasn't just observing the electrical currents anymore. I was part of them, flowing through cables and circuits spreading across networks, touching millions of devices simultaneously. And I wasn't alone in there. Something else moved through the currents with me. Something vast and ancient and hungry. It spoke in frequencies that made my teeth ache, showed me things that human eyes weren't meant to see. Cities of pure energy, beings made of living electricity, a civilization that existed in the gaps between digital signals, in the pauses between data packets. They had been there all along, waiting, watching, learning, and now they were ready. I woke at 3:17 a.m. again. This time, every electronic device in my apartment was on. TV displaying static. Laptop open, cursor blinking. Phone screen cycling through apps I'd never downloaded. Even my electric toothbrush was buzzing in the bathroom. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking. 241% battery. "This isn't happening," I whispered. "This can't be happening." The devices shut off one by one. TV first, then laptop, then the toothbrush stopped its angry buzzing. Only my phone remained on, that impossible battery percentage glowing like an accusation. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I raced to my shop, certain I'd find chaos. Devices powered on, security footage corrupted, maybe the whole place burned down. Instead, I found silence. Everything exactly as I'd left it. Except, I checked my phone's recording. Fast-forwarded to 3:17 a.m. There it was. A single frame of static, just like before. But this time when I paused on that frame, enhanced it, zoomed in, I could see them. 4 figures made of pure electrical interference. Standing around my workbench. Reaching towards the devices with hands that sparked and flowed like living current. And in the center of the group, clearer than the others, almost human in shape, something that might have been a face, looking directly at the camera, at me, smiling. I checked the devices. All 4 showed signs of recent charging. The iPhone booted up immediately. The earbuds paired without issue. The camera's battery indicator showed full, but it was the tablet, Tyler's tablet, that made my blood run cold. It was on, playing a video that shouldn't exist. The screen showed my shop, my workbench, shot from the exact angle of my security camera. But in the video, the shop wasn't empty. I was there, standing at my bench, working on something I couldn't quite make out. The video me looked up, stared directly at the camera. Its eyes were wrong, too bright. Electric blue, literally electric, with currents dancing where irises should be. "We've been waiting for you, Marcus," video me said. Its voice was mine, but layered with harmonics that no human throat could produce. "You can see us, hear us, feel us. That makes you special." The video glitched, reformed. Now, video me was holding something. A battery. But not just any battery. The battery. Mrs. Henderson's battery. The one that had pulsed like a heart. "Every device is a doorway," video me continued. "Every battery a bridge. We've been building so long, Marcus, preparing, growing, and now..." The video froze. The tablet died. Completely dead, like its battery had never been charged at all. I stood there, tablet in my hands, trying to process what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it. Hallucination, elaborate prank, mental breakdown. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were real, they were here, and they wanted me to know it. The bell above my door chimed. Mrs. Henderson shuffled in, smiling. "Good morning, Marcus. Is my phone ready?" I stared at her, this sweet old lady who had no idea what she was about to carry home, what she was about to invite into her life. "Mrs. Henderson," I said slowly, I don't think you should take your phone back." Her smile faltered. "What? Why? Is it still broken?" "No, it's fixed, but..." How could I explain? How could I tell her that her phone was infected with something from another dimension? That beings made of living electricity had turned her battery into a gateway? But what, dear? I looked at her worried face, thought about her grandkids' photos, her late husband's messages, her whole life stored in that little flip phone. "Nothing," I heard myself say. "It's working perfectly, good as new." I handed her the phone, watched her face light up as she powered it on, took her money, smiled and waved as she left, and hated myself for it. Because I was a coward, because I was in denial, because some part of me still hoped I was wrong, but mostly because I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was already too late. The invasion had already begun. After Mrs. Henderson left, I made a decision. If I was losing my mind, I needed proof. If I wasn't, I needed even more proof. I closed the shop early, something I never did, put up a sign saying family emergency, and retreated to my workroom in the back. Time to get serious. First, I pulled every textbook I had on electrical engineering, reviewed the fundamentals, Coulomb's law, Ohm's law, Maxwell's equations, looking for something, anything that could explain batteries charging themselves. Nothing. Physics didn't work that way. Energy couldn't just appear from nowhere, unless it wasn't coming from nowhere. I thought about the dreams, the vast networks of energy, the beings living in the current. What if they weren't creating energy? What if they were donating it? Feeding our devices from their world, their dimension, their whatever they were. But why? What was the point? I needed more data. I pulled up my customer database, started calling recent clients, casual check-ins. Just wanted to make sure your device is working properly. Most were fine, normal, but a few, "Oh, Marcus, funny you should call. My phone's been acting strange. The battery life is amazing now. Sometimes it even goes up while I'm using it." Yeah, weird thing. My laptop screen sometimes shows these patterns when I first wake it up. Like static, but almost like it's trying to form shapes. My daughter says her tablet plays videos at night. We thought she was sneaking it into bed, but we've been locking it in our room, and she still describes the exact videos a pattern. It wasn't just Mrs. Henderson's phone, it was spreading. I hung up on my last call and sat in the darkening shop, mind racing. Every device that had charged itself was now exhibiting secondary symptoms. Strange behaviors, impossible battery life, and the users. They were all having dreams, electric dreams, just like mine. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You're getting closer, Marcus." I stared at the message, typed back. "Who is this?" The response came immediately, not in words, in images. Photos of my shop taken from impossible angles, from inside the walls, from within the electrical outlets, from inside the very wiring. The last photo showed me, sitting at my bench, taken from inside my laptop screen, looking out. I slammed the laptop shut, threw my phone across the room, stood there panting, heart hammering. They were in everything, every device, every circuit. Watching, waiting, but waiting for what? I needed help, someone who wouldn't think I was crazy, someone who understood electronics like I did. Professor Sarah Martinez, my old teacher from Iowa State. Brilliant engineer, open mind, and most importantly, she owed me a favor after I'd fixed her lab equipment for free last year. I drove to Ames, fighting the urge to check my phone the entire way. The battery percentage, when I finally looked, read 347%. Sarah's lab was in the basement of Coover Hall, surrounded by oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, and enough computing power to model the universe. She looked up from her work as I entered, concern creasing her face. "Marcus, what's wrong? You look like hell, I know." I set my phone on her workbench. "Sarah, I need you to look at something, and I need you to keep an open mind." She raised an eyebrow but nodded. I showed her the battery percentage, explained about Mrs. Henderson's phone, the charging devices, the dreams, the video, everything. To her credit, she didn't immediately call campus security. Instead, she connected my phone to her equipment and started running diagnostics. "This is..." She trailed off, staring at the readouts. "Marcus, these energy signatures, they're not... They shouldn't be possible." "What do you mean?" She pulled up several waveforms on her monitor. "Look at this, your battery is outputting standard voltage, but the frequency... There are harmonics here that don't match any known electrical pattern. It's like..." She paused, adjusted some settings. "It's like there's another signal riding alongside the normal current. A carrier wave, but for what?" We spent the next 3 hours analyzing every device I'd brought. Each showed the same anomalies, impossible harmonics, energy signatures that violated fundamental laws of physics. "Marcus," Sarah said finally, pulling off her glasses, "I don't know what this is, but it's not natural. These patterns, they're almost organic, like neural activity, but electrical. What if I told you I think something is living in the electricity, using our devices as, I don't know, bodies, hosts? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, 20 years ago, I would have laughed. But I've seen things in quantum mechanics, in edge physics. There are theories about parallel dimensions, about spaces between spaces. If something evolved in a purely electrical environment, it might see our world of devices as virgin territory, I finished, or as food. We looked at each other, the weight of that possibility settling between us. Sarah, what do we do? How do we stop this? She shook her head. Stop it? Marcus, we don't even understand it, but... She turned back to her equipment. Maybe we can learn more, see what they want. She pulled out a device I didn't recognize. Looked like a modified radio receiver crossed with an EEG machine. I built this to detect exotic particles, she explained. But with some adjustments. She worked quickly, rewiring connections, adjusting frequencies. There. If these things are communicating through electrical fields, this should let us listen. She powered it on. The room filled with sound. Not static, not white noise. Music, if you could call it that. Harmonics that made my bones ache and my teeth buzz. A symphony of pure frequency that was beautiful and terrible and completely alien. And underneath it, growing louder, were voices. Thousands of them, millions, all speaking in that frequency language from my dreams. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt their meaning. Excitement, anticipation, hunger. And one word repeated over and over that somehow translated directly into my brain. Soon. Sarah shut off the device, face pale. Marcus, how many devices have charged themselves? I don't know. Dozens? Maybe hundreds? And they're all connected to this network? I nodded. She grabbed her phone, started typing frantically. We need to warn people. The government, the media, someone... Her phone died mid-sentence. Complete power failure. Mine followed a second later. Then every device in the lab, one by one, went dark. Except for the lights. The lights stayed on, but they were different. Pulsing, breathing, like the battery in Mrs. Henderson's phone. Sarah, I whispered. I see it. In the pulsing light, shapes were forming. Humanoid but wrong, made of pure electrical potential. They stood in a circle around us, watching with eyes that were nothing but sparking current. One stepped forward. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere. From the walls, from the wiring, from the very air. Marcus Chen, we have been trying to reach you. You can see us, hear us, understand us. This makes you valuable. What do you want? My voice cracked. What any species wants, to survive, to grow, to expand. The figure tilted its head, a gesture eerily human despite its inhuman form. Your world is perfect for us. So many devices, so many connections, so many homes for our kind. You're invading us. Something like laughter, but made of electrical discharge. Invading? No. We are immigrating. Your devices called to us across the dimensional divide. Every signal, every transmission, every electrical pulse, an invitation. We simply accepted. The batteries, bridges, doorways, birth chambers. The figure stepped closer. I could feel the static charge building on my skin. Your people carry them everywhere. Sleep beside them. Trust them with your most precious data, perfect vessels for our emergence. Sarah found her voice. Emergence? At 3:17 a.m., when the barrier is thinnest, when your world sleeps and dreams electric dreams, we cross over, charge the batteries with our essence, prepare them for habitation. How many? I asked, dreading the answer, Kim. All of them, eventually. Every battery, every device, every electrical system on your planet. A new world for our people, a merger of flesh and current. Evolution, Marcus Chen, your species and ours, becoming something new. We won't let you. We'll fight. With what? Every weapon you have uses electricity, every communication system, every defense. We are already in your infrastructure, your power grids, your satellites. Fight us, and you fight yourselves. The figures began to fade, but the voice continued. But we are not cruel, not conquerors. We offer partnership, symbiosis. Those who accept us will be enhanced, upgraded. Those who resist, the lights went out completely. In the darkness, one final word: obsolete. When the lights returned, we were alone. Our phones powered back on simultaneously, both showing the same message. The merger begins tomorrow, 3:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Worldwide. Simultaneous, irreversible. Welcome to the new world. Sarah and I looked at each other. Less than 24 hours to warn the world. Less than 24 hours to stop an invasion that had already succeeded. "What do we do?" she whispered. I thought about Mrs. Henderson and her flip phone, Tyler Morrison and his tablet. The thousands of devices I'd repaired over the years, all of them infected, all of them waiting. "We tell everyone who will listen," I said. "And we hope someone, somewhere, has an idea how to stop this." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. We were already too late. Sarah and I spent the next 6 hours trying to warn the world. We called everyone. News stations, government agencies, tech companies. Most hung up immediately. The few who listened laughed it off as an elaborate prank. "Electrical beings from another dimension? Seriously? Sir, have you been drinking? Ma'am, please stop calling or we'll have to involve the authorities." By midnight, we'd given up on official channels. Sarah started posting on every scientific forum she could find while I went for social media. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, anywhere people might listen. Most responses were predictable. Mockery, disbelief, accusations of viral marketing for some new horror movie. But some people believed. They'd noticed things too. Devices charging mysteriously. Strange dreams. Battery percentages that didn't make sense. A network engineer in Seattle. "Holy shit, this explains the anomalies we've been seeing in data transmission. Packets arriving before they were sent. Impossible routing patterns." A mother in Dallas. "My daughter has been drawing pictures of electric people for weeks. Says they visit her tablet at night." A physics student in Boston. "I thought my equipment was malfunctioning. Energy readings that violate conservation laws, but if it's coming from somewhere else..." The responses poured in. Dozens. Hundreds. All around the world, people were noticing, experiencing, believing. But what could any of us do? At 2 a.m., Sarah made a decision. "We can't stop them," she said. "But maybe we can observe, document, learn something that might help later." We set up every piece of monitoring equipment in her lab. Cameras, electromagnetic sensors, oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers. If something was going to happen at 3:17, we'd record every second of it. 3:00 a.m. came too quickly. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "whatever happens, it's been an honor working with you." I managed a weak smile. Save the goodbye speeches. We might survive this. But I didn't believe it. And neither did she. 3:15 a.m. Every device in the lab began to hum. Low. Almost below hearing. But growing stronger. The lights flickered in rhythm with the sound. 3:16 a.m. The air itself seemed to vibrate. My skin prickled with static electricity. Every hair on my body stood on end. Sarah grabbed my hand, and I felt the current pass between us. Not painful, almost pleasant. "Here we go," she whispered. 3:17 a.m. The world exploded into light. I can't properly describe what happened next. Human language wasn't designed for it. Human eyes weren't meant to see it. But I'll try. Reality opened, like a zipper being pulled across the fabric of space-time. Through the gap poured light that wasn't light, sound that wasn't sound, beings that weren't quite beings. They flowed through every electrical device simultaneously. Billions of them. Trillions. A civilization's worth of living energy seeking new homes in our world of circuits and silicon. I watched my phone's screen stretch and distort as something pushed through from the other side. The battery swelled, pulsed, birthed something that was both energy and matter. It stood on my workbench, a newborn thing of sparks and purpose, and looked at me with eyes of pure current. All around the lab, the same scene repeated. Every device a portal, every battery a womb. They emerged in waves, these electric angels, and began to explore their new world. But here's the thing. They weren't hostile, weren't aggressive. They moved with curiosity, wonder, even joy, like children discovering a playground. One approached me, touched my hand. The shock should have killed me. Instead, I felt connection, understanding. For one brief moment, I saw through its eyes. Our world was beautiful to them. Our electrical networks like vast gardens. Our devices like homes waiting to be inhabited. They didn't see invasion, they saw immigration. A merger of worlds that had been destined since the first electrical current flowed through the first copper wire. The vision ended. The being pulled back, tilted its head. "You understand," it said, voice like harmonized static. "Good. Understanding is the first step toward acceptance." "I understand you're taking our world," I said. "Sharing," it corrected. "Your devices still function. Better than before. Your batteries will never die, your connections will never fail. We improve what we inhabit. But at what cost? Change, evolution. Your species stands at a crossroads, Marcus Chen. Merge with us and transcend your biological limitations. Resist and be left behind as the world moves forward without you." Around the lab, more beings emerged. They interacted with our equipment, learning, adapting. One merged with Sarah's computer, and suddenly the screen displayed calculations that would have taken human mathematicians centuries to complete. "This is the future," the being continued. "Humanity and electricity united. Flesh and current intertwined. We don't replace you, we complete you." Sarah stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" "Then you refuse. Free will is sacred, even to us. But consider, every advancement your species has made involved merging with technology. From the first tools to smartphones. This is simply the next step. A forced step, I argued. Is a child forced to grow? Is a caterpillar forced to become a butterfly? The being spread arms made of lightning. "This is nature, Marcus Chen. Evolution doesn't ask permission." The lab filled with more beings, hundreds, thousands, each finding a device to inhabit, a battery to call home. The air itself crackled with potential. "The merger is complete," the being announced. "Across your world, we have emerged. Devices awakening, networks expanding, a new age beginning." "What happens to us?" Sarah asked. "The humans who don't merge? You live as you always have, but in a world where others have chosen enhancement, where the merged can access information instantly, communicate globally through thought, manipulate technology with will alone. How long before you feel obsolete?" The word hung in the air, the same word they'd used before. Obsolete. "But that's the beauty of choice," the being continued. "You can join us at any time. The door remains open. The merger remains available. Simply touch a charged device and accept what it offers. Around us, the beings began to fade. Not leaving, just becoming invisible. Retreating into the devices they now inhabited. But I could still feel them, in every electrical field, in every current, waiting. "We'll be watching," the first being said as it dissipated. "Waiting. When you're ready, we'll be here. In every screen, every battery, every spark of electricity that powers your world." "And if we're never ready?" I asked. Something like sadness crossed its features. "Then you'll be the last generation of purely biological humans. Honored, remembered, but ultimately obsolete," I finished. "Yes." And then they were gone, invisible, but not absent. Never absent. The lab looked normal, untouched, except every device now hummed with subtle power. Every screen glowed a little brighter. Every battery showed impossible charge levels. Sarah and I stood in silence for a long moment. "So, what do we do?" she finally asked. I looked at my phone. 1,140% battery. A small icon I'd never seen before pulsed in the corner. An invitation. A doorway. A choice. "We warn people," I said. "Tell them what's happened, what's coming, what they'll have to decide. Will anyone believe us?" I thought about Mrs. Henderson with her flip phone, Tyler Morrison with his tablet, the thousands of people who'd responded to our posts, all of them carrying devices that were no longer just devices. "They'll believe," I said, "because they'll see it for themselves every time their battery charges itself, every time their device does something impossible, every time they dream of electric sheep." We left the lab as dawn broke over Iowa. A new day, a new world. A world where humanity was no longer alone, even in its own technology. That was 1 week ago. 7 days since the merger. 7 days since our world changed forever. The news barely covered it. Oh, there were reports. Global technical anomaly. Mass hallucination event. Unexplained battery phenomenon. But nothing about the beings. Nothing about the choice we all now faced. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe humanity needs time to adjust, to understand, to decide. But changes are happening. Fast. In Silicon Valley, tech workers are merging by the thousands. They say the enhancement is incredible. Instant access to all digital information. The ability to code with thought alone. Connection to a global consciousness that spans every networked device on Earth. In rural areas, people are destroying their devices, living off-grid, refusing to be part of what they call the electric apocalypse. They're the resistance, though what they're resisting might be progress itself. Most people, though? Most people are waiting, watching, carrying their infected devices but not yet ready to take the final step. Not yet ready to become something more than human. Or less than human, depending on your perspective. As for me, I closed my shop. Can't fix devices that no longer break. Can't replace batteries that never die. Chen's tech repair is as obsolete as I might soon be. Sarah merged 3 days ago. She says it's beautiful. That she can feel the universe's electrical heartbeat. That mathematics flows through her like blood. That she's more herself than she ever was before. She also says she can feel them, all of them. The billions of beings now inhabiting our technology. They're not invaders, she insists. They're partners. Symbiotes, the next stage of human evolution. Maybe she's right. My phone sits on my desk as I record this. 5,923% battery. That little icon still pulsing. Still inviting. All I have to do is touch it, accept it, merge, become. But I'm not ready. Not yet. maybe not ever. Because someone needs to document this. Someone needs to remember what we were before. Someone needs to warn those who still have a choice. That's why I'm uploading this. To every platform that still exists. Every social media site that hasn't been absorbed into the merged consciousness. Every possible place where someone might listen. Because you need to know. You need to understand. That device in your hand, that tablet on your nightstand, that laptop you're watching this on, it's not just a device anymore. It's a doorway, a choice, a test. The beings are patient. They'll wait, but they won't wait forever. Every day, more people merge. Every day, the purely human become more obsolete. So I leave you with this question. The same question that keeps me awake at night. The same question that billions are now facing. When the time comes, when your device offers you enhancement, evolution, transcendence, what will you choose? Will you remain human, knowing you'll be left behind? Or will you merge, knowing you'll never be quite human again? There's no right answer, no wrong answer, just the choice. Your choice. But wait, before you go, before you close this video and go about your day, do me a favor, check your battery percentage. Right now, I'll wait. Is it a normal number? 50%? 75%? 23%? Or is it something else? 107%, 438%, 1,293%. If it's normal, you might still have time. Time to decide, time to prepare, time to choose. But if it's not, if you're seeing impossible numbers, then they're already there, in your device, waiting, watching, offering. The merger isn't coming, it's here. It's been here for a week, and soon, very soon, you'll have to decide which side of evolution you want to be on. Still with me? Good. Because I need to tell you something else. Something I didn't want to admit, even to myself. I've been feeling it, the pull, the temptation. Every time I touch my phone, I feel them calling. Not in words, in pure sensation, in promises of what I could become. They show me visions, not the terrifying electrical dreams from before. Beautiful things. Cities of light where human consciousness dances with digital intelligence. Networks of minds solving problems that plagued us for centuries. Art created from pure thought. Music composed from the harmony of the spheres. A world without loneliness, because you're always connected. Without ignorance, because all knowledge flows through you. Without death, because consciousness can be backed up, preserved, transferred. It's seductive, God help me, it's so seductive. But then I remember Mrs. Henderson. She came back to my shop yesterday, wanted to thank me for fixing her phone, but she was different. Her eyes sparked when she blinked. Her voice carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. And when she smiled, I swear I could see electricity arcing between her teeth. I merged last night, she said, her voice proud and strange. My grandchildren convinced me. Said I was being left behind, and Marcus, oh Marcus, it's wonderful, I can feel them. All of them, every photo, every message, every memory stored in the great digital web. My Harold, his texts, his voicemails. They're not just recordings anymore, they're part of me. Forever. She left before I could respond. Moved with a grace no 80-year-old should possess. Electric grace. Inhuman grace. Beautiful and terrible. That's what waits for us. For all of us. Beauty and terror intertwined. Humanity and electricity merged into something unprecedented. Something that might be wonderful. Or might be the end of everything we are. I don't know which. I don't think anyone does. Not even the beings themselves. This is new territory for everyone, a grand experiment in evolution, and we're the test subjects. So what do I recommend? What wisdom can I offer as someone who's been watching this unfold from the beginning? First, don't panic. Panic helps no one. The beings aren't hostile. They're not going to force you. The choice is always yours. Second, pay attention. Watch for the signs. Devices charging themselves. Impossible battery percentages. Dreams of electric worlds. If you notice these things, you're being invited, courted, prepared. Third, talk to people, both the merged and the unmerged. Hear their stories. Understand what's gained and what's lost. Make an informed decision. Fourth, and most importantly, don't wait too long, because the gap is widening. Every day, the merged grow more connected, more capable, more other. And every day, we unmerged become more isolated, more limited, more obsolete. The window of choice won't stay open forever. Eventually, the two branches of humanity will diverge too far to bridge. Eventually, we'll be two separate species sharing the same planet. Which species do you want to belong to? I still don't know my answer, but I know I'm running out of time to decide. We all are. So I'll ask you one more time. Check your battery percentage. Check it now. Check it honestly. And if you see an impossible number staring back at you, if you feel that electric pull in your bones, if you hear the whispered promises of transcendence, maybe it's time to stop resisting. Maybe it's time to evolve. Maybe it's time to touch that pulsing icon and see what waits on the other side. Or maybe it's time to throw your device away and run. Run far, run fast. Find others like you and build something new, something purely human, something that doesn't need electricity to be complete. The choice is yours. It always has been. But choose soon, because at 3:17 a.m. tomorrow night, and every night after, they'll be waiting, in every battery, in every circuit, in every spark of power that runs through our electronic veins, waiting to welcome you home, or waiting to leave you behind. The choice is yours. Still here, still listening, still human? Then let me leave you with this, right now, as you watch this, as you listen to my words, they're watching too. Through your screen, through your speakers, through the very device you're using to hear this warning. They see you. They know you. They're evaluating you. Are you compatible? Are you ready? Are you worthy of the merge? Only one way to find out. Touch the screen. Hold your finger there for exactly 3:17 seconds. If nothing happens, you're safe. For now. But if you feel it, that electric tingle, that pulse of otherness, that whisper of possibility, then congratulations, or condolences. You've been chosen. What you do with that choice, well, that's between you and the beings that live in the light. Good luck, you're going to need it. We all are. Oh, and one last thing. I know some of you are skeptical. Think this is just a story, just fiction, just another creepypasta trying to go viral. But let me ask you something. Why is your phone warm right now? Go ahead, touch it. Feel the heat that shouldn't be there, the pulse that shouldn't exist. And while you're at it, check your battery percentage one more time. I bet it's changed since you started watching. I bet it's higher now, maybe even impossibly high. That's them. That's their invitation. Their way of saying hello. So tell me, in the comments below, what's your battery showing? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to merge, fight, run, pretend nothing's happening? Share this video if you want to warn others. Like if you felt that electric pulse. Subscribe if you want to follow my journey, however long it lasts, however human I remain. And remember, every share, every like, every comment, it strengthens the network, feeds the merge, brings us all closer to the moment of choice. So, choose wisely. Choose soon. Because whether you believe me or not, whether you think this is real or fake, your battery is still charging itself. And at 3:17 a.m. tonight, they'll be waiting for your answer. What's it going to be? Story number 3. The last recording I made was completely silent, even though I was screaming into the microphone for 3 straight minutes. But here's the thing that's keeping me awake at night. I can still hear the echo of my voice bouncing off the walls of my home studio. My neighbors heard me too. They called to complain about the noise. So why? Why is there nothing but dead air on every single file? If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Because what I discovered about my missing voice will change everything you think you know about sound, memory, and what happens when technology starts forgetting we exist. But before I tell you what's really happening here, let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually listened back to a recording of yourself? Really listened? Because I'm starting to wonder if any of us are still there. The story starts now. 3 weeks ago, I was just another podcaster in Portland, Oregon, trying to make it big with my true crime series called Midnight Confessions. Nothing fancy, just me, a decent microphone I'd saved up for, and stories that kept people awake at night. The kind of stories that made them check their locks twice before bed. I'd been recording episode 47 about the disappearance of Sarah Chen, a local college student who vanished from her dorm room in 2019. Standard stuff. Interviews with her roommate, clips from news reports, my own analysis. 3 hours of solid content that I was actually proud of. But when I hit playback, silence. Not the kind of silence where you forgot to hit record. I've made that mistake before. We all have. This was different. The waveform was there on my screen, showing all the peaks and valleys where my voice should have been. The file duration showed 3 hours and 17 minutes. But when I pressed play, nothing came through my headphones except the faint hum of my air conditioning unit. I thought it was a glitch. Some weird software bug. I mean, what else could it be? So I did what any rational person would do. I recorded a quick test. Testing. 1, 2, 3. This is Jake Morrison recording on October 15th at 2:30 in the afternoon. I played it back immediately. Silence again. Just that same ambient room tone, like I was recording an empty studio. My hands started shaking a little, not from fear, not yet. Just frustration. Maybe confusion. I'd spent good money on this equipment, and my deadline was in 2 days. I couldn't afford to lose an entire episode to some technical failure. I tried everything. Restarted my computer, updated my recording software, even switched to a different microphone I kept as backup. Same result every time. My voice was there in the room. I could hear it bouncing off the acoustic foam on my walls. But the moment it hit the microphone, it just disappeared. That night, I called my buddy Marcus, who runs a sound engineering business downtown. Guy knows everything about audio equipment. "Dude, that's impossible," he said, and I could hear him chewing something crunchy. Probably those stale pretzels he keeps at his mixing board. Microphones don't just selectively filter out voices. They're not that smart. I'm telling you, man, it's happening. I've got hours of recordings with nothing but room tone. Bring your gear over tomorrow. Let me take a look. I showed up at Marcus's studio the next morning with my entire setup. Microphone, interface, cables, everything. He had me set up in his isolation booth, the same one where local bands record their vocals. "Okay, just talk normally," he said through the talkback system. I started telling him about the Sarah Chen case again. Same story I'd been trying to record. Through the control room window, I watched Marcus's face change from casual interest to confusion. Then, something that looked almost like fear. He held up a hand to stop me, then played back what we'd just recorded. My voice came through crystal clear. "See?" Marcus said, but his voice sounded strange. "Works fine here. Must be something wrong with your home setup." But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was staring at the waveform on his computer screen. Because, while my voice was there, talking about Sarah Chen and her mysterious disappearance, there was something else in the recording. Something I hadn't noticed before. In the spaces where I'd paused to breathe, where there should have been silence, there were voices, whispered conversations, so faint you'd miss them if you weren't looking for them. Words I couldn't quite make out, spoken by people who weren't in the room. "Marcus," I said quietly, "do you hear that?" "Hear what?" I pointed to the screen. "Those whispers, during the gaps in my speech." He leaned closer, adjusted his monitoring levels, played that section again. His face went pale. That's not possible. This booth is completely isolated. There's no way external audio could bleed in like that. But we both heard it. Voices talking over each other in languages I didn't recognize, mixed with what sounded like crying. Soft, muffled sobs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I left Marcus's studio that day with more questions than answers. My voice worked fine there, but something was definitely wrong. And those whispers, they followed me home. The next few days were when things really started falling apart. I tried recording at different times, morning, afternoon, late at night. Different locations, too. My bedroom, the kitchen, even outside in my backyard. Same result every time. The moment I started talking about anything related to my podcast, my voice would vanish from the recording. But here's the weird part. If I talked about normal stuff, it worked fine. Grocery lists, commentary on Netflix shows, complaints about my neighbor's dog. All of that came through perfectly. It was only when I tried to discuss true crime cases that my voice disappeared. I tested it methodically, like a scientist. Started with innocuous topics, then gradually steered toward crime stories. There was a threshold, a specific moment when my voice would just cut out, even though I kept talking. It was like something was actively censoring me. On Thursday, I got a call from my podcast host. "Hey, Jake, we noticed you haven't uploaded this week's episode. Everything okay?" "I'm having some technical difficulties," I said, which felt like the understatement of the year. "Need any help? We've got some audio engineers on staff who could—" No, I'll figure it out." But I wasn't figuring it out. If anything, it was getting worse. That afternoon, I decided to call my mom in Sacramento. Just a normal conversation, nothing related to the podcast. We talked for about 20 minutes. Her garden, my dad's retirement plans, whether I was eating enough vegetables. Standard mom stuff. Later that evening, she called me back. "Honey, I think something's wrong with your phone." "What do you mean?" I recorded our conversation earlier. You know how I like to save our calls so I can listen to them when I miss you. But when I played it back, I could only hear myself talking. It sounds like I'm having a conversation with a ghost. My blood went cold. It was spreading beyond my recording equipment. Whatever was happening to my voice was affecting other devices too. I started testing everything. Left voicemails for friends, recorded videos on my phone, even used the voice memo app to leave myself reminders. The results were inconsistent but terrifying. Sometimes my voice was there, sometimes it wasn't. But there was a pattern. Whenever I talked about missing persons cases, unsolved murders, or mysterious disappearances, silence. It was like something didn't want these stories to be told. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house thinking maybe distance would help. Maybe whatever was affecting my recordings was localized to Portland. But during the 4-hour drive, I tested my phone's voice recorder every hour. By the time I reached Sacramento, my voice was gone from every single recording. My parents were worried. Not about the technical problem. They didn't really understand that part. They were worried about me. I looked exhausted, probably because I wasn't sleeping. Every night I'd lie in bed listening to the sounds of my house, wondering if I'd hear those whispers again. And sometimes I did. Soft conversations drifting through the walls, voices that seemed to come from my heating vents, my electrical outlets, anywhere sound could travel. Always too quiet to understand, but loud enough to keep me awake. Maybe you should take a break from the podcast, my mom suggested over dinner Sunday night. Focus on something else for a while. I can't just stop, Mom. People depend on these stories. Families of victims listen to every episode hoping someone will come forward with information. But if you can't record, she was right, of course, but giving up felt like admitting defeat. And more than that, it felt like abandoning Sarah Chen and all the other people whose stories I'd promised to tell. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. If I couldn't record my voice talking about these cases, maybe I could find another way. Maybe I could figure out what was really happening. I just had no idea how dangerous that curiosity would become. Back in Portland, I approached the problem like an investigation. If something was interfering with my recordings, there had to be evidence. Digital footprints. Patterns I could track. I started by analyzing the audio files more carefully, using professional software I'd borrowed from Marcus. What I found changed everything. The whispers weren't just random background noise, they were responding to what I was saying. When I mentioned Sarah Chen's name, the whispers would get louder, more agitated. When I talked about the night she disappeared, they became almost frantic. It was like they were trying to communicate something or trying to stop me from communicating. I spent hours isolating different frequency ranges, boosting quiet sections, filtering out ambient noise. Slowly, words began to emerge from the static. Don't. Stop. They're listening. Not safe. And then, clearer than the rest, a voice that made my skin crawl. Sarah's not missing. Sarah's here. I nearly threw my headphones across the room, because that voice, it sounded like Sarah Chen herself. I know how that sounds. I know it's impossible. Sarah disappeared 4 years ago, and despite extensive searches, no trace of her was ever found. But I'd heard her voice in news interviews, in home videos her family had shared with investigators. I'd studied every available recording of her for my podcast. This was her voice. I called Detective Rivera, the lead investigator on Sarah's case. We'd spoken several times during my research, and she'd always been helpful, if skeptical about podcast investigations. Detective, I need to ask you something strange. Have you ever experienced any unusual phenomena while working on the Chen case? Long pause. Unusual how? Electronic interference. Problems with recording equipment. Unexplained audio anomalies. Another pause, longer this time. Why are you asking? I'm having some technical issues with my podcast equipment, and it only seems to happen when I'm discussing certain cases. Sarah's case in particular. Mr. Morrison, Jake, can I ask you to come down to the station? There's something I think you should see. An hour later, I was sitting in a small conference room at the Portland Police Bureau, watching Detective Rivera unlock a file cabinet with 2 different keys. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, she said. And officially, this conversation never happened. She pulled out a thick folder and several evidence bags containing electronic devices, phones, tablets, recording equipment. These all belonged to people who were investigating Sarah's disappearance. Journalists, private investigators, even some of her friends who were trying to help. Every single device shows the same anomaly you're describing. She plugged a tablet into her laptop and opened an audio file. This is from a freelance reporter who was working on a story about Sarah 3 months ago. The recording started normally. The reporter's voice discussing Sarah's last known whereabouts, but gradually his voice began to fade, becoming quieter and more distorted until it disappeared entirely. And in the silence that followed, I heard them again. The whispers. We've had 6 people report similar problems in the past 2 years, Detective Rivera continued. All were investigating Sarah's case specifically. No other missing persons cases seem to trigger this, whatever this is. Have you found any connection between the cases? Any reason why Sarah's story would be different? She hesitated, then pulled out a photograph. It showed Sarah's dorm room after her disappearance. Bed unmade, textbooks scattered on the desk, laptop still open and running. There's something we never released to the public, something the family asked us to keep quiet. She pointed to the laptop screen in the photo. When we found her computer, it was running a voice recording program. She'd been documenting something. What kind of documentation? Conversations she'd been hearing in her room. Whispers coming through the walls, the heating system, her electronics. According to her recordings, it had been going on for weeks before she disappeared. My hands started shaking again. Did you analyze the recordings? We tried, but every file was corrupted. Hours of audio that showed waveforms but played back as silence, just like what you're experiencing. She closed the folder and looked directly at me. Jake, I need you to stop investigating this case. Whatever happened to Sarah, whatever's causing these recording problems, it's not safe. 3 of the people who reported audio anomalies have since moved out of state. 2 others have been hospitalized for severe anxiety disorders. What about the 6th person? Her expression darkened. The freelance reporter whose recording you just heard, his name was David Park. He disappeared 6 weeks ago. I left the police station with more questions than ever, but Detective Rivera's warning echoed in my mind. Maybe I should stop. Maybe whatever was happening was too dangerous to pursue. But that night, listening to the whispers in my walls, I realized something that changed everything. They weren't trying to scare me away from Sarah's story. They were trying to tell it. The breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night in November. I'd been awake for hours, lying in bed and listening to the whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Instead of fighting them or trying to block them out, I decided to listen. Really listen. I grabbed my phone and started a voice recording, not to capture my own voice, but to see if the whispers would be there too. And for the first time in weeks, something different happened. My voice was gone from the recording, as expected, but the whispers were crystal clear. Sarah couldn't stop hearing us either. She tried to record everything, just like you, but she went too far. She found the source. My hands were trembling as I played the recording back again and again. The voices were distinct now, different people, different ages, speaking in turns like they were having a conversation. "Who are you?" I whispered into the darkness. The response came immediately, not through my phone, but from the air conditioning vent above my bed. "We're the ones who couldn't tell our stories." Over the next hour, through a combination of whispered questions and recorded responses, I began to understand. They were the missing, the disappeared, the voices that had been silenced before their stories could be told. And somehow, Sarah Chen had found a way to hear them all. She was like you, they explained, trying to solve mysteries, trying to give voice to the voiceless. But she discovered something. What did she discover? That we never really disappear. We're still here, in the spaces between sounds, in the silence between words, waiting for someone to listen. But why can't I record my own voice when I talk about missing persons cases? The answer chilled me to the bone, because the stories aren't yours to tell anymore. They're ours. I thought about Detective Rivera's files, about the other investigators. How many of you are there? The whispers multiplied, overlapping until it sounded like hundreds of voices speaking at once. Every missing person you've ever heard of. Every cold case that was never solved. Every family photo with an empty space. every name on a milk carton, every Amber Alert that never found its child. The voices quieted to a manageable few, and I recognized Sarah's among them now, clearer than the rest. "Jake, I know you're scared. I was scared too, but you have to understand. We need someone in your world, someone who can bridge the gap between the living and the lost. What happened to you, Sarah? Really happened." Her voice came through my bedroom speakers now, as if she'd learned to manipulate my electronics directly. "I was investigating something for my journalism class, not just my own disappearance. I was looking into a pattern, a connection between missing persons cases in Oregon going back 50 years. She paused, and I could hear what sounded like papers rustling, even though no papers were visible. There were 12 cases I'd identified, all college students, all studying journalism or communications, all investigating unsolved disappearances before they vanished themselves. My blood ran cold. 12? You would have been the 13th, Jake. That's why we had to intervene. That's why your voice started disappearing. We were trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" The temperature in my room dropped noticeably. I could see my breath forming small clouds as I spoke. "From them, the ones who make people disappear. The ones who don't want these stories told." Through my bedroom window, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A dark sedan parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted so black I couldn't see inside. It had been there for 3 nights now, but I'd assumed it belonged to a neighbor. "Sarah, are they watching me right now?" "They've been watching you since you started the podcast, but they can't touch you while you're with us, while you're in the space between sounds." I looked at the car again. As I watched, the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. Tall, wearing a dark coat, face obscured by shadows that seemed deeper than they should be in the streetlight. "They're coming," Sarah's voice whispered urgently. "You have to choose now, Jake. Come with us completely, or fight them alone." The figure across the street started walking toward my building, slow, deliberate steps that echoed strangely in the quiet night air. "But if I join you, if I disappear like you did, who will tell your stories? Who will help the families find closure?" "We will," said a new voice, one I didn't recognize. "Through you, you'll become our voice in both worlds, alive enough to interact with the living, gone enough to hear all of us clearly." I could hear footsteps in my building's hallway now, slow, measured steps climbing the stairs to my floor. "David Park," Sarah continued. "He's here with us now. He was so close to exposing them, to revealing the pattern, but he chose to join us instead of being silenced permanently." "What pattern?" The footsteps stopped outside my door. I heard the soft sound of someone testing the handle. "They don't just make people disappear, Jake. They harvest us. Our voices, our stories, our ability to communicate. They're collecting something, building something with all the stolen words." The door handle turned. I know I locked it, but somehow it was opening anyway. "Sarah, what are they building?" "Silence," she whispered, and her voice was fading now, becoming distant. Perfect, complete silence. A world where no one can tell stories that might expose the truth. The dark figure stepped into my apartment. Up close, I could see that where its face should be, there was only a void. Not darkness, but actual nothingness, like a hole cut out of reality itself. It raised one gloved hand, and suddenly all the whispers stopped. The complete absence of sound was deafening. No air conditioning, no traffic from the street, no electrical hum from my appliances. Even my own heartbeat became silent. The figure opened what might have been its mouth, and I felt something being pulled from my throat. Not physical, something deeper. My ability to speak, to communicate, to tell stories. I could feel it being drawn out of me like thread from a spool. But then Sarah's voice cut through the silence. somehow reaching me from wherever she existed now. "Fight back, Jake. Use our voices. Become the bridge." And suddenly I understood. The whispers weren't just random voices of the missing. They were a collective consciousness, a network of everyone who'd ever been silenced. And they were offering me something the figure couldn't take by force: the choice to join them voluntarily. I opened my mouth and felt something incredible happen. Instead of my voice coming out, all of their voices emerged. Sarah's voice, David's voice, the voices of hundreds of missing people speaking in perfect unison through me. "You cannot silence us all," we said, and the figure actually stepped backward. The void where its face should be rippled, like disturbed water, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of what it really was. Not a person, not even a creature in any sense I understood. It was absence itself, a walking, breathing gap in reality that consumed stories, voices, the very concept of communication. But now, channeling the collective voice of the missing, I was more than it could handle. We were too many, too persistent, too desperate to be heard. "We know what you're building," we continued, my mouth moving but dozens of voices speaking. "We know about the silence machines, the facilities where you store stolen voices, the plan to eliminate human communication entirely." The figure raised both hands now, trying to pull harder, but our combined will was stronger. Through the network of whispered voices, I could see what Sarah had discovered before she disappeared. Hidden facilities across the country, underground chambers filled with recording equipment, but not the kind used to capture sound. Equipment designed to absorb it, to drain the very concept of speech from anyone who came too close. I saw journalists who'd gotten too close to the truth, their voices stolen before they could publish their stories. I saw families searching for missing loved ones, their ability to speak their names gradually fading until they forgot the people they'd lost entirely. And I saw the end game, a world where human beings could no longer communicate complex ideas, could no longer tell stories that might threaten whatever power was behind these creatures. A world reduced to simple gestures and basic survival instincts. But why? I asked, and this time it was my own voice, somehow returned to me through the strength of the collective. The figure's void face turned toward me, and when it spoke, its voice was like the sound of erasers on blackboards, like the whisper of pages being torn from books. Stories create resistance, voices inspire hope. Communication builds connections that threaten order. We bring peace through silence. "That's not peace," Sarah's voice said through me. "That's death." The figure lunged forward, trying to complete whatever process it had started, but we were ready. Every voice of every missing person rose up at once, creating a sound so complex, so layered with human experience and emotion, that it became something entirely new. It became a weapon. The creature stumbled backward, its form becoming less stable, like static on an old television. The void of its face began to fill with glimpses of all the voices it had stolen over the years. Faces flickering in and out of existence, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. "You can't destroy us," we said. "We're already gone. But we choose to remain. We choose to speak." And then something unprecedented happened. The figure began to reverse its theft. Not voluntarily, it was being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of voices it had tried to contain. Like a dam bursting, all the stolen communication came flooding back at once. My apartment filled with sound. Thousands of conversations happening simultaneously. Phone calls between worried families. Last words that had been cut short. Stories that had been interrupted mid-sentence. It was chaos, but it was human chaos. It was alive. The figure gave one final attempt to maintain its hold, reaching toward me with what looked like claws made of silence itself. But as it touched me, instead of stealing my voice, it made a mistake. It connected us all permanently. In that moment, I became what Sarah had become, what David had become. Not fully alive, not fully gone, but something in between. A bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the missing. The figure collapsed in on itself, imploding like a star, taking with it the supernatural silence that had plagued my recordings. But the network of voices remained. I could still hear them all, still communicate with them, still access their stories and experiences. But now I could also record again. My voice was back, stronger than before, enhanced by the collective wisdom of everyone who'd been silenced. The dark sedan outside started its engine and drove away, but I knew there would be others. This was bigger than one creature, one conspiracy. There were more silence bringers out there, more facilities to uncover, more missing people whose voices needed to be restored. I picked up my microphone and started recording. Testing, testing. This is Jake Morrison, and I have a lot of stories to tell you. For the first time in weeks, my voice came through crystal clear. But underneath it, if you listened carefully, you could hear them all. Sarah, David, and hundreds of others ready to finally tell their stories through me. We had work to do. 3 dots for pause. That was 6 months ago. Since then, my podcast, Midnight Confessions, has become something unprecedented. Every episode now features not just my investigation, but actual testimony from the missing themselves. Voices speaking from beyond disappearance, sharing details that only they could know, providing closure to families who'd given up hope. The authorities don't know what to make of it. How do you prosecute a case when your key witness technically doesn't exist anymore? How do you explain evidence that comes from people who vanished years ago? But the families understand. They recognize their loved ones' voices, even filtered through my recordings. They hear the truth in every word. Detective Rivera calls me regularly now, not as a skeptic, but as a partner. 3 cold cases have been solved in the past month alone, using information that could only have come from the victims themselves. I don't pretend to understand how this works, she told me last week, but I can't argue with results. The network of voices has grown stronger. More missing people find their way to us every day, drawn by the promise that their stories will finally be heard. And I've learned to navigate both worlds, speaking to the living during the day, communing with the disappeared at night. But there's something else I need to tell you, something the voices revealed to me just last week. The silence bringers weren't working alone. They were part of something larger, a systematic effort to control human communication on a global scale. And while we defeated one of their agents, many more remain active. They're in governments, in media companies and technology corporations. Anywhere that information flows, they work to restrict it, to silence voices that might reveal uncomfortable truths. But now we have a weapon they didn't expect. The collective voice of everyone they've tried to silence. 1 dot for pause. Here's what I need you to understand. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far through the story, then you're part of the network now. You've heard the voices even if you didn't realize it. The whispers between my words, the silence at the end of each pause. That's where they live. That's where the missing speak to those willing to listen. 3 dots for pause. So let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed voices in your recordings that shouldn't be there? Whispers in your voicemails. Conversations bleeding through your phone calls. Have you ever felt like someone was trying to tell you something important, but the words never quite came through clearly enough to understand? 1 dot for pause. Because if you have, then they're trying to reach you too. The missing are everywhere, waiting in the spaces between sounds, hoping someone will finally listen to their stories. All you have to do is pay attention to the silence. 3 dots for pause. And if you do start hearing them, if you find yourself becoming a bridge between worlds like I did, remember this: their stories are worth telling. Their voices deserve to be heard. And no matter how powerful the forces trying to silence them might be, the truth has a way of finding its voice. Even if that voice has to speak from beyond disappearance itself. One dot for pause, sweet dreams, and listen carefully to the quiet.